They called me weak, pathetic, incapable. They laughed when I walked into Michis, sabotaged every project I touched. He systematically destroyed my reputation until they forced me out of the company I helped build. They thought they broke me forever. But what they didn't know is that weak people give up, and strong people come back. I didn't come back weak. I came back as their corporate nightmare, and now every one of those who laughed, every one of those who judged, every one of those who destroyed, wakes up every morning afraid of my next move. I am not done yet. My name is Elena Volkov. I am 36 years old. 8 years ago I was the joke of one of the biggest private equity firms on Wall Street. Literally the joke. There was a meme circulating internally at the Titan Capital office, a photo of my LinkedIn profile with the caption, "When your greatest achievement is making decent coffee." Everyone laughed. Partners laughed. Associates laughed, even assistants laughed. I knew because someone eventually showed me, thinking it was funny, not realizing the devastation it caused. But to understand how I reached the point of total humiliation, how I became the person everyone judged too weak to belong, I need to go back to the beginning, to when I was 25, fresh out of Columbia Business School with an MBA, top of my class, driven, ambitious, genuinely believing that merit mattered, that hard work would be rewarded, that competence was enough. And I got a job at Titan Capital, a boutique private equity firm specializing in tech acquisitions, not through connections because I had none, but through sheer performance doing recruiting, case studies that impressed, and interviews where I demonstrated not just analytical skills but creative thinking. Starting as an analyst, the lowest tier, but a foothold in an industry notoriously difficult to break into. The first few months were brutal as expected. 80-hour weeks, analysis minutiae, the grunt work that all analysts do. But I was thriving, I was learning, I was contributing. Oh, I thought I was. And then the comments started, subtle at first. A partner named Derek Ashford, head of the tech investments division, occasionally making remarks about how it was refreshing to have a feminine perspective, always a tone that managed to be simultaneously condescending and patronizing. Or an associate named Brad Mitchell questioning my numbers Michis, not genuinely curious but dismissively, always assuming errors for checking. And the other analysts, predominantly male, forming an informal network that excluded me, conversations stopping when I approached, happy hours where you wasn't invited. I tried to ignore it. And there was a deal, a tech startup acquisition that I was leading due diligence on, a company called NextGen Solutions. I spent weeks analyzing it, identified significant hedge flags their financial projections, discrepancies revenue recognition, potential fraud actually. I compiled a comprehensive report, presented it to partner Michi, recommending against the acquisition. And Derek Ashford, who was pushing the deal because he had a personal relationship with NextGen SCU, dismissed my findings completely. Elena, you being too cautious, too focused on technicalities. You need to see the bigger picture, the potential, not just the current numbers. The other partners nodded, agreeing, and the deal proceeded despite my warnings. 6 months later, NextGen imploded. The fraud was exposed. Titan lost $40 million. Guess who was blamed? Not Derek who pushed the deal. Not the partners who approved it. Me. Because apparently my analysis wasn't clear enough, wasn't insistent enough, wasn't compelling enough in communicating the risks. And so began a narrative that became a permanent label. Elena doesn't have judgment, lacks confidence in her convictions, too timid to make tough calls. The irony was maddening because the exact opposite was true. I had the judgment to identify the fraud, I had the conviction to recommend against it, but my communication style, which wasn't aggressive, which wasn't dominant, was interpreted as weakness. And then the harassment escalated, not over sexual harassment that I could address, but subtle, ongoing undermining. Brad Mitchell spreading rumors that I was only at Titan through a diversity hire, that my qualifications were questionable. Derek publicly criticizing my work in meetings, holding me to a higher standard than others. Colleagues taking credit for my analysis, presenting each as their own work. In every complaint to it was met with that boys will be boys attitude, with suggestions that I develop a thicker skin, that I network better, that I be more assertive. I tried everything. I tried being more assertive, but then I was labeled aggressive e unlicable. I tried networking, but I was always an outsider e de boys clubby. I tried letting my work speak, but the work was constantly credited to others. 3 years I was burned out, demoralized, questioning my own competence despite knowing rationally that I was good, that my skills were solid. And then came the incident that completely broke me. There was a big deal, an acquisition of an company by a tech giant, hundreds of millions, a career-making type of deal. I was part of the team, contributing significantly to the analysis, to the strategy. At the end, when the deal closed successfully, a celebration happened, champagne in the office, congratulations all around. Derek Ashford gave a speech, thanking the team members by name all malice, obviously completely omitting my contribution. When I tried to bring it up diplomatically afterward, suggesting that perhaps it was an oversight, Derek laughed. Elena, you did data entry, basically. No credit for grunt work on a deal memo. That moment, 4 years of accumulated humiliation, frustration, injustice crashed over me. I responded, not diplomatically, not professionally, but with raw honesty about the systematic exclusion, about the ignored contributions, about the hostile environment. Derek se transformed, anger replacing amusement. If you are not happy, maybe private equity isn't for you. Maybe try something more suited to your temperament. It was an implicit termination threat, thinly veiled. I knew that fighting further would be career suicide, so I walked away, went home, and cried for hours. The next day, I was called into not for support but for a performance improvement plan, pressão de pico inspiratório, essentially a corporate death sentence, a documented trail leading to termination. The pressão de pico inspiratório was filled with vague criticisms. Dois need to demonstrate leadership presence, communication needs improvement, team collaboration issues, all subjective, all impossible to objectively refute. During the 3-month pressão de pico expiratório period, every move was scrutinized, every mistake magnified, every success minimized. The atmosphere became completely toxic, people avoiding me because association with a failing employee was a liability. At the end of the 3 months, inevitably, I was terminated, officially performance-based, unofficially because it didn't fit, because I challenged the status quo, because my existence reminded everyone of the discriminatory culture they maintained. Cleaning my desk, packing my belongings into a box, walking out while former colleagues avoided eye contact, I felt a humiliation so complete, a devastation so total, that I questioned everything. My competence, my worth, my future. Unemployment was a dark period, applying for jobs I should qualify for but not getting callbacks, because Titan's reputation preceded me, because Derek Ashford had a network, because the blacklist was informal but effective. Months passed, my savings dwindling, depression setting in, questioning if I should give up finance entirely, find a different career, a different life. But before continuing this story of devastation transformed into determination, I need to pause and connect with you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, which city, which country. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect moment, because this journey has twists you won't miss. In the end, hate this story from 0 to 10. I want your opinion. Now, Let me tell you how the girl they judged all week for Wall Street transformed into the force that Wall Street learned to fear. 6 months after being fired from Titan Capital, I was living a studio apartment in Queens, an area I would never have considered before, but it was what I could afford with unemployment benefits and odd jobs. I had applied for 123 positions in finance, received exactly 3 interviews, and 0 offers. The network I thought I had built evaporated. Calls were not returned, LinkedIn messages were ignored, because association with a failed analyst was toxic. I was at my lowest point, considering literally anything else barista, administrative assistant, completely abandoning a decade of education experience, when I received an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor at Columbia where I did my MBA, who remembered me from my thesis about using IT to predict acquisition success rates. Helena, I heard about the situation at Titan. Wall Street is loss. I have a proposition if you're interested. My meeting with Dr. Chen a week later was an absolute turning point. She explained that she was consulting for a small hedge fund, Prometheus Analytics, which used quantitative approaches, algorithmic trading, and machine learning. They needed someone with a finance background in tech understanding to develop new AI models for evaluating private equity opportunities. Each want to pay what Titan did initially, Dr. Chen admitted. Each is a startup hedge fund, limited resources, but you will have equity, autonomy, and a chance to prove your theories without the boys' club politics. I hesitated because the hedge fund world was different from private equity, because a small firm seemed risky, because my pride suggested aiming for another big-name firm. But I also recognized that the traditional path had failed, that playing the same game produced the same results, that I needed a different approach. I accepted the position, the title grander than the reality. Quantitative investment strategist, at a firm of exactly 7 people including the receptionist. But I had a desk, a computer, access to databases, and most importantly, a mandate to develop proprietary models. I completely immersed myself, working 16-hour days, not because I was forced to but because I finally had creative freedom, intellectual challenge, and space to explore the ideas that big firms dismissed. I started developing AI algorithms analyzing not just financial metrics but the behavioral patterns of founders, text analysis of communications, social network analysis of boards, alternative data sources that traditional analysts ignored. And the results were promising. My models predicted with 78% accuracy which acquired startups would thrive versus fail. Comparatively, the industry average was around 55%, barely better than a coin flip. Prometheus began using the models to inform investments, small positions initially because the fund was small, but the hit was consistent. The portfolio was outperforming the market significantly. Word began spreading in quantitative finance circles, not Wall Street mainstream but the niche community of quants and data scientists. Prometheus attracted additional capital, the fund growing from 20 million to 50, then 100. My equity stake, initially worthless, began having real value. I also started publishing research papers in quantitative finance journals, building a reputation not through schmoozing at cocktail parties but through demonstrable results, peer-reviewed work. 2 years after joining Prometheus, the fund had grown to 300 million under management. It was known in the industry as that I should be beating everyone. My models were the cause of the success, and my compensation reflected it. I was finally making significant money, more than I ever imagined at Titan. But it wasn't primarily about the money. It was about validation, proof that my abilities were real, that my judgment was sound, that the only weakness was in buying into a system that was never designed to value my contributions. Then came the opportunity that changed the game completely. A private equity firm, not Titan but a competitor of theirs called Zenith Partners, approached Prometheus, wanting to license their models for their own deal evaluation. Prometheus' founder, a man named Robert Martinez, brilliant mathematician but not a businessman, was inclined to accept a reasonable licensing fee. But I suggested a different approach. Don't license the models. Offer consultancy on a per diem basis so that we prove our value concretely, retain control of the IP, and position ourselves for bigger things. Robert hesitated but agreed. The first deal consultancy was a success. Zenith SE acquisition based partially on our recommendations thrived. The second deal also. The third. Our reputation grew. Other peer firms reached out, wanting insight, wanting the edge that my models provided. 3 years after leaving Titan humiliation, I was an in-demand consultant for multiple top-tier firms. And the irony wasn't lost that now the firms that wouldn't hire me, the firms where Derek Ashford's Wispan campaign had blacklisted me, were paying a premium for my expertise. During this time, I was also making connections different from before, not superficial networking but genuine relationships with other outsiders, other women, people of color, anyone who faced similar barriers. This informal network became a support system, became an information exchange, and eventually became the foundation for what came next. Because while thriving professionally, I hadn't forgotten Titan, hadn't forgotten Derek, Brad, and everyone who laughed, who judged, who destroyed. I wasn't actively plotting revenge. I was building, but also observing, tracking, and waiting. The opportunity for a real reckoning came 4 years after leaving Titan. Prometheus now had $1 billion under management. It was a major player in the quantitative hedge fund space. I had become a managing partner, increasingly the public face, speaking at conferences, quoted in the financial press, respected. Titan Capital, meanwhile, was struggling. Several bad deals, departing partners, client redemptions. The valuation of the firm was declining. Rumors of a potential sale. And then Derek Ashford made a mistake, a critical error born of arrogance. He reached out, via an intermediary, wanting a meeting, ostensibly to bury the hatchet, to discuss potential collaboration. Every instinct said decline, said engaging was giving him power, but strategically, I saw an opening, saw a chance for a final act. I agreed to meet, a neutral location, a coffee shop in Midtown. Seeing Derek after 4 years was surreal. He had aged poorly, stress visible, his confidence shakier. Elena, good to see you, he started, with false warmth. I heard about your success, impressive. I smiled politely, said nothing. Look, the past is the past, Derek continued. There were misunderstandings. And now, we both mature professionals. Maybe there is a way to work together. Titan could use someone with your expertise, could offer a consulting arrangement, very lucrative. The proposal laid bare. Titan was desperate, wanting salvation, ironically from the person they destroyed. Why would I call me back? I asked calmly. Because, Derek said, his is my own strain. I'm a partner now. I have influence. I can ensure each is different. Frankly, Titan SE brand, its connections, could benefit you too. It was a transparent lie. Derek wasn't the Sony partner. The firm was failing. He had nothing to offer but desperation. Ele consider it, I said neutrally, leaving it ambiguous. In the following days, I did consider it, but not collaboration. I considered something much more satisfying, more permanent. Through the network I built, through lawyers silently acquired, I began researching Titan deeply, its financials, client relationships, and internal dynamics. I discovered that the firm was more vulnerable than I imagined, over-leveraged, some potential legal issues in past deals, and nervous clients. I realized I could destroy them, relatively easily. I could expose them. I could ruin everyone. But I also realized destruction alone wouldn't suffice. I needed something more, something that demonstrated definitively that the judgment of weakness was profoundly wrong, something that transformed the industry perception entirely. So I formulated a plan, audacious, complex, risky, but potentially spectacular. Prometheus would acquire Titan Capital, a hostile takeover, essentially by the failing firm, absorb the assets, and most importantly, place the entire leadership. I pitched it to Robert Martinez and the other Prometheus partners. The proposal was met with skepticism initially. Why buy a failing PE firm when we hear hedge fund? But I explained the synergies, explained the Titan client relationships, deal flow, brand, despite the troubles, had value, and that combining them with Prometheus SE Analytics created a unique hybrid model. I also explained, honestly, that I was personally motivated, that each was about proving a point, definitively. Robert, surprisingly, supported me. If each makes business sense, e each dois, then personal motivation is a bonus. Let us do it. The next 6 months were intense preparation, securing financing, building a case for Titan clients and limited partners, in quiet diplomacy convincing stakeholders that the transition would be beneficial. And then we launched the takeover bid, public, aggressive, offering a price that Titan struggling partners couldn't refuse, offering clients continuity with upgraded capabilities. Wall Street watched. The spectacle of a small hedge fund acquiring an establishment PE firm was unprecedented, was shocking. Titan's leadership fought back, Derek Ashford particularly vocal, calling the bid hostile, inappropriate, revenge-motivated, all true but irrelevant because the business case was solid, because clients LPs saw the value. The 3-month battle culminated in victory. Prometheus successfully acquired Titan Capital. The deal closed, ownership was transferred. Walking into Titan's office for the first time as an owner, not a terminated analyst but the majority shareholder in incoming CEO, the feeling was indescribable. The first official day after the acquisition, I woke up at 5 in the morning, not from anxiety but from anticipation. I had waited 5 years for this moment, 5 years since the walk of shame leaving Titan's office in total humiliation. And now I would return not as a supplicant but as the owner. I put on an impeccable suit, Armani, black, powerful. Not because I needed to impress but because I wanted to feel completely in control. I arrived at Titan's offices at 7:30, before the majority of the staff, deliberately. I wanted to walk through the empty corridors alone first, reclaiming a space that once felt so hostile. Each conference room, each desk area, carried memories somigid from the early days when I was too optimistic, most painful from the slow systematic destruction of my confidence and reputation. But now each was mine, literally, I walked with ownership because each was. At 8, they started arriving, first assistants, then analysts, then associates, finally partners. I could see the confusion, the anxiety on their faces when they saw me, some recognizing me, some not. At 9, I called an all-hands meeting, mandatory, everyone in the main conference room. The room filled gradually, people whispering, speculating, Derek Ashford entering last, his face setting a hard line, quilling expecting a fight. And I stood at the front, a commanding presence that I never had the opportunity to demonstrate 5 years ago. Good morning. For those who don't remember, my name is Elena Volkov. I worked as an analyst 5 years ago. And now I return as the CEO of Titan Capital. Complete silence, shock visible. And I know there are questions, anxiety about what this means for each of you. So me going to be direct. This firm failed not because of the market, not because of bad luck, but because of culture. A culture of exclusive networking, of valuing connections over competence, of systematic marginalization of anyone who didn't fit a narrow mold. I could see the discomfort spreading, especially among those who participated in that culture. As a result, the firm lost talent, lost money, lost reputation. I am ready to rebuild, correctly this time. That means changes, significant ones. I outlined a plan. Restructuring the investment process, implementing data-driven approaches combined with experiential judgment, diversifying the team dramatically, e establishing clear meritocracy principles with objective performance metrics. E some of you, I continued, looking directly at Derek, will find there is no place in the new structure. Because I cannot rebuild the culture while keeping the people who actively destroyed the previous one. I announced determinations, effective immediately, starting with Derek Ashford, Brad Mitchell, 3 other partners, 2 associates who were the most egregious the harassment undermining. Security was present. Agire had prepared separation agreements, everything legally proper but emotionally satisfying in a way that he couldn't deny. Watching Derek as he fast transform from arrogance to disbelief to rage was a moment that had played 1,000 times in my imagination, but the reality was better. It was concrete. It was real. You can't do this, Derek exploded. I have a contract. I have tenure. You have a separation agreement that your counsel can review, I interrupted calmly. Violation of conduct clauses concerning hostile work environment, harassment, breaches of fiduciary duty the next-gen deal that lost $40 million. You can sign willingly, take the generous severance offered, or you can fight have everything aired publicly litigation. The choice is yours. Derek knew he was cornered, knew the skeletons existed, knew public litigation would destroy his reputation permanently even if he won technically. He signed, as did the others, the humiliation mirroring mine 5 years ago but amplified because each was public, because each was witnessed by the entire firm. As the terminated partners and associates cleared their desks and walked out in shame, the remaining employees watched silently, some satisfied, some nervous, all realizing that the power dynamics had shifted fundamentally. After the exits, I turned to the remaining staff. For everyone else, the proving ground starts now. Meritocracy means top performers are advanced regardless of background, poor performers are not protected regardless of relationships. I expect excellence, I expect innovation, and I expect real collaboration, not boys club networking. The next few weeks were intensive transformation, a hiring spree bringing diverse talent, implementing Prometheus SI systems, renegotiating client relationships based on the new value proposition. Some existing employees adapted, thrived actually, in the meritocratic environment, discovering that they didn't need politics to succeed. Some quit, uncomfortable without the old protections. The firm began transforming, not just in composition but in performance. Deal flow increased, the hit rate improved, and client satisfaction surged. Within 6 months, Titan under my new leadership had exceeded the previous year's performance by 40%. The industry noticed, the media noticed, the narrative shifted from troubled firm acquired to innovative merger creating a new model. Elena Volkov, previously an industry joke, was now featured in Fortune, Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal, profiled as a visionary leader transforming private equity. The irony was delicious, but also sobering because I understood the transformation wasn't finished, that proving long-term viability required sustained effort. Then Derek Ashford, after 6 months of silence, published an op-ed in the Financial Times, a thinly veiled critique attacking activist investors who prioritize ideology over returns, obviously referencing me. The piece was bitter, defensive, claiming meritocracy was code for reverse discrimination, that diversification sacrificed excellence. My initial instinct was to respond angrily, to defend, but then I remembered the lesson learned the hard way: results speak louder. And instead of a public rebuttal, I simply continued the work, continued demonstrating through performance that the critique was wrong. A year after the takeover, Titan's returns under my leadership had exceeded the industry average significantly, the client base expanded, the reputation recovered, was enhanced. Derek op-ed aged poorly, cited occasionally as an example of establishment resistance to needed changes. I also began mentoring actively. Young professionals, especially women, people of color, anyone facing barriers similar to those I faced, sharing lessons, providing opportunities, in building a network that supported instead of excluded. The Prometheus Titan merge entity became known not just for its returns but for its culture, named repeatedly in best places to work lists. It recruited top talent because its reputation preceded it. Years passed for since the acquisition, none since the original humiliating exit. I was established, respected, the firm was thriving. But then something unexpected happened that tested everything, reminded me that transformation is never complete, that challenges never finish. I received a second query, an investigation into deals from the period of Derek's leadership, potential improprieties. Legally, Titan was liable despite the leadership change because the corporate entity persisted. The initial panic was palpable because the investigation meant exposure, audits, potential damages. But it was also an opportunity because the investigation necessitated a complete review of old practices, documentation of the previous administration's failures. I cooperated fully, provided extensive documentation of the changes implemented, if the distance between the previous culture and the current one. The investigation eventually focused narrowly on Derek specifically and the other terminated partners, individual liability separated from corporate. Derek faced charges, securities fraud related to the next-gen deal, misrepresentations to investors. The trial followed, public, messy, EVGKT, because the evidence showed exactly what I warned about 9 years ago. It showed the systematic dishonesty Derek employed. Derek was ultimately convicted, sentenced to prison, 2 years not long but significant. Watching the man who destroyed my career, who labeled me weak, who laughed, facing the consequence, I felt complicated. Not joy exactly, not pure triumph, but satisfaction mixed with melancholy, because the system took a decade to correct, because justice was profoundly delayed. After the trial, visiting Derek prison would have been a twist, a novelistic confrontation, but it didn't, because it didn't need closure from him. I had closure already through rebuilding, through success, through demonstrating everything his judgment of weakness missed. Instead, I focused on continuing to build, on using my platform to advocate for systemic changes in finance, on supporting the investigation of other discriminatory practices industry-wide. Because ultimately, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation, reclaiming power, proving competence unquestionable, building something genuinely better. Derek Ashford, Brad Mitchell, everyone who laughed, were footnotes, cautionary tales, not the main narrative. The main narrative was Helena Volkov transforming from a joke to a force, from dismissed to feared, not through cruelty but through competence proving unignorable, through building so successful that denial became impossible. 5 years after the acquisition of Titan Capital, at 36 years old, I had become something I never anticipated, not just a successful CEO, but a figure the industry genuinely feared in certain ways. Not feared because I was cruel or vindictive, but feared because I represented accountability, feared because my success was undeniable proof that the system had been wrong, feared because my presence challenged comfortable mediocrity. The manifestations of this fear were subtle but pervasive. At the industry conferences, when I walked into a room, conversations shifted, body language changed, people were suddenly conscious of how they appeared, what they said. Partners from other firms were excessively polite interactions, nervous laughter punctuated jokes, a deference that seemed more like anxiety than respect. Initially, I thought each was positive, that each was respect earned, but I gradually perceived that underneath was fear. Fear of being the next Derek, fear of being exposed, and fear of inadequacy being revealed. A crystallizing moment came during a panel at the Private Equity Summit, discussing the future of investing. My fellow panelists were all men, CEOs of major firms, with decades of experience. During the Q&A, the moderator asked a question about diversity. The three male panelists gave rehearsed responses, mentioning programs, initiatives, and numbers all superficial. When it was my turn, I spoke. Honestly, diversity is neither charity nor pastor. It is a competitive advantage. Firms that add homogeneous miss opportunities replicate the same biases and underperform. The resistance to diversify is not a business principle. It is an addiction to comfort. Yes, change is uncomfortable. It requires admitting past mistakes. It requires ceding power. But the alternative is irrelevance. The silence afterward was palpable, an uncomfortable shuffling. After the panel, at the cocktail reception, several attendees approached privately, thanking me for having the courage to say what nobody says, but also asked me not to name their firms publicly. Fear was evident. One, a partner at a top-tier firm, whispered, "You terrify people, Elena. Not because you hear wrong, but because you hear right. Rightness is a threat." The comment struck me because I realized the fear wasn't about me personally. It was about what I represented. Accountability, meritocracy, and the exposure of comfortable arrangements. I felt ambivalence, because fear meant influence, meant the power to alter the industry, but it also meant isolation, meant being seen as aggressive even when I was merely honest. Then, a phenomenon that an HR consultant later termed the Volkov effect began to happen. Firms began implementing changes, diversifying hiring, reviewing compensation equity, establishing clear performance metrics, not because they converted ideologically, but because they feared being publicly compared unfavorably, feared talented recruits choosing Titan over them, and feared clients questioning their practices. The effect was positive, measurably. Industry demographics shifted, practices improved, culture evolved. But I personally felt the weight because I was on a pedestal. Every decision was scrutinized, every misstep amplified. Relationships became complicated. Dating was virtually impossible because anyone in the finance industry felt intimidated or suspected ulterior motives. Anyone outside finance didn't understand the pressures. The loneliness that accompanied success was unexpected and painful, reminding me that the transformation had costs. I also faced ongoing challenges because Titan's success made me a target. Competitors sought vulnerabilities, and the media was hyper-focused on any controversy. A small HR complaint, resolved amicably, became the headline. Volkov's Titan facing internal strife. A minor investment loss, statistically insignificant, became quacks appearing in Volkov empire. The scrutiny was unrelenting, and absolutely gendered, because my male counterparts with similar profiles didn't face equivalent microscoping. Coping required therapy, honestly, regular sessions with Dr. Monica Ellis, processing stress, maintaining perspective, and avoiding burnout. "You carry too much alone," Dr. Ellis observed. "Power doesn't have to be isolating, but you manage it so through guarding your vulnerabilities, through fearing appearing weak." She was right. In compensating for the original perception of weakness, I had swung to the extreme, demonstrating never weakness, never vulnerability, maintaining constant armor. And the armor, while protective, also prevented genuine connection. Then someone unexpected entered my life, Cameron Torres, a nonprofit executive in educational equity, whom I met through a charitable function. Cameron wasn't intimidated because he wasn't in finance, saw me as a person, not an equal. He challenged me ways that felt refreshing. "You are constantly performing strength," Cameron said one evening during a date. "But strength is also in admitting limits, in asking for help, in showing you don't have to have all the answers always." The relationship with Cameron developed slowly, carefully, me learning to lower my guard incrementally, to share insecurities that I habitually suppressed, to accept support without interpreting each as weakness. Cameron introduced me to a world outside the finance bubble, the nonprofit sector, social entrepreneurs, people driven by impact not returns, a perspective that grounded me, that reminded me of purpose beyond proving critics wrong. Through Cameron, I began doing Mori philanthropy, not vanity projects but genuine engagement, funding educational programs for underrepresented students interested in finance, creating mentorship networks, and using resources to create opportunity for others. The work was fulfilling in a way that business success alone wasn't, a connection to a broader purpose, a legacy beyond the firm's performance. Then a macro event happened that tested everything. A financial crisis in 2023, not on the scale of 2008 but significant, market volatility, several major firms facing distress. The industry looked to tighten, wondering if the transformation would survive the stress test, if meritocracy was a luxury of good times. I doubled down, maintained my principles, made hard decisions, including layoffs that were painful but necessary, and communicated transparently with staffing clients, demonstrating that the culture wasn't superficial but foundational. Titan navigated the crisis successfully, losses minimal compared to competitors, recovery faster, clients retained. The aftermath reinforced my reputation, proved the model wasn't just a feel-good initiative but financially sound. The industry begrudgingly acknowledged it, the shift from fear mixed with genuine respect, recognizing I not only disrupted the status quo but built a legitimately better model. The awards started coming, CEO of the Year, most influential finance, not because I was seeking them but because the results were undeniable. Each recognition, while validating, also felt slightly hollow because internally I still carried the scars of the original rejection, still questioned occasionally if I was enough, if I was proving sufficiently. Therapy helped process this, Dr. Ellis guiding me to understanding that the drive to prove stemmed from deeper wounds, that healing required not more accolades but internal acceptance. Elena, she said, when will it be enough? How many successes do you need before you believe you deserve to be where you are? It was a profound question because the answer was elusive, because a part of me was still internally bracing for the next rejection, the next humiliation, even when the external reality was triumph. Cameron was helping too, gently pointing out to when I sabotaged happiness through overworking, through avoiding vulnerability, through maintaining walls. You won, Cameron said during a particularly difficult conversation about relationship commitment. You beat everyone who doubted you, but you he is still fighting, is still proving. For whom? Derek is in prison, the critics are silenced, the firm thrives. At some point, you need to let your guard down, you need to thrive, not just survive. They weren't struck the truth, because even after 8 years, I was still operating in survival mode, still expecting an attack, still braced for the revealing of an inadequacy that no longer existed. I began consciously working on relaxing my guard, on accepting that the transformation wasn't precarious but solid, that my success wasn't a lucky fluke but earned, and that respect wasn't temporary but established. I started delegating more, trusting my leadership to me genuinely, taking actual vacations, not working remotely, investing in my personal life alongside the professional. The fear that the industry held lessened slightly as I humanized more, as I appeared less invulnerable, as I showed complexity, as other firms realized my success didn't necessarily mean their destruction. I began collaborating on industry initiatives, chairing committees in industry groups, mentoring sales of other firms genuinely, not condescendingly, sharing insights generously. The dynamic shifted from adversarial to collaborative, from feared outsider to respected insider, a transformation that felt like a final validation. 10 years after leaving Titan in humiliation, 5 years after buying the company, I was sitting in my psychotherapist's office, crying for the first time in years. Not from sadness exactly, but from accumulated emotional exhaustion. Dr. Ellis had asked a simple question. When was the last time you felt genuinely relaxed? I didn't answer because I didn't remember. The entire decade had been a constant state of high alert, proving, defending, building, achieving. Even now, with everything I had accomplished, I didn't rest. Elena, you achieved everything you said you wanted, Dr. Ellis observed. Titan is a success, you are respected, Derek and the others paid the price. So why do you still look like someone at war? Because, I replied after a long pause, I don't know who I am without the fight. For 10 years, my identity was entirely built around proving the critics wrong. And now that I've proved it, now that I've won, there is a void. It terrifies me. The confession was a revelation because I hadn't articulated it even to myself. My purpose for a decade was proving no weakness, demonstrating strength, and reclaiming dignity. And with my enemies defeated, with success achieved, the underlying motivation vanished, leaving existential uncertainty. What if it wasn't actually about them? Dr. Ellis suggested. What if the real fight wasn't against Derek or Titan but against your own self-doubt, against the internalized messaging of inadequacy? And she was obviously right. A childhood with immigrant parents and high expectations, being constantly an outsider academically because of my accent, because of my appearance, because of not fitting the mold, had created a deep need to prove my worthiness. Derek and Titan simply triggered this, brought the latent insecurity screaming to the surface. So how do I heal? I asked. How do I let go of the identity that I forged proving myself? By building a new identity not defined by opposition, Dr. Ellis answered. By discovering what genuinely brings you joy and fulfillment, separate from demonstrating strength. The next few months were a journey exploring this, trying to disconnect my self-worth from professional achievement, exploring interests suppressed for a decade. I started painting, something I enjoyed in college but abandoned as impractical. I was terrible initially, but the process was meditative, liberating. I joined a book club through Cameron, discussing literature that had nothing to do with finance, perspectives that challenged, and worldviews that broadened. I volunteered at Cameron as a nonprofit, tutoring teens in financial literacy, connecting with people not professionally but humanly. Slowly, incrementally, I began finding an identity beyond Elena Volkov, turnaround Seiyu. Starting to see myself as a complete person with multiple facets, not a singular laser-focused achievement machine. My relationship with Cameron deepened, me finally lowering my walls sufficiently for genuine intimacy, sharing not just successes but fears, not just strengths but vulnerabilities. I proposed eventually, not because I needed stability but because I wanted partnership, because love felt like choosing, not proving. The wedding was small, intimate, friends genuinely close, not professionally useful, family limited but present, a celebration of connection, not a status. The honeymoon was 2 weeks completely offline, in a remote cabin in the mountains, with no phone signal, no ability to check markets, work, or anything. The first few days were anxious, constantly thinking about the firm, worried about missing a crisis. But gradually, disconnecting, focusing on the present, on Cameron, on nature, on simple pleasures, I felt a peace unfamiliar but intoxicating. Returning renewed and energized, not from work but from genuine rest, I was ready for the next chapter. Professionally, I started transitioning, not leaving Titan but delegating more, promoting the CEO to essentially run the day-to-day, me shifting to a chairman whole strategic oversight but not the operational grind. The decision met resistance internally, some fearing stability was threatened, externally some speculating burnout or troubles. But each was intentional, choosing sustainability over martyrdom, modeling leadership not through 24/7 availability but through strategic vision in the empowerment of the team. The firm continued thriving, demonstrating that success wasn't dependent on a single person. It was systemic, cultural, e institutional. Each was a validation that the structure I built was sound regardless of my personal presence. With Maritime, I expanded my philanthropic work significantly. I established the Volkovi Foundation, focused on 3 areas: supporting underrepresented students entering finance, for investigative journalism exposing corporate malfeasance, e supporting survivors of workplace harassment. The work felt aligned with my values e a way that pure business success dignity, transforming resources into tangible good, addressing the root causes of the problems I faced, e creating systemic change. Then, something totally unexpected happened that reframed the entire narrative. I received a letter from someone, anonymous initially, thanking me for speaking up years ago, saying that reading about my case inspired them to report their own harassment, which resulted in corrective action and changed their life trajectory. The letter struck me deeply because until then, I saw my journey as primarily personal vindication. Eu wasn't considering the broader ripple effects. Email letters came, emails, messages, from people across the industry and beyond, sharing how my public transformation inspired their own actions, encouraging them to challenge injustices, pursue careers they thought impossible, and demand better. Realizing the impact extended beyond Titan, beyond my own recovery, was humbling and purposeful in a way that personal revenge never was. I started speaking more publicly, not about business strategy but about broader themes: resilience, challenging systems, transforming adversity, and authenticity. My TED Talk, Redefining Strength, From Surviving to Thriving, went viral, millions of views, resonating beyond finance in any industry, any context where people face barriers. The speech didn't focus on revenge or defeating enemies. It focused on choosing to rebuild, choosing to create better, choosing to transform pain into purpose. The response was overwhelming. Schools wanting me as a speaker, organizations wanting trainee, individuals wanting mentorship. I didn't respond to all of them, but I tried to create systems. I developed an online course about navigating hostile workplaces, and I wrote a book eventually, Weak no More, Transforming Marginalization into a Movement, combining my personal story with research, practical strategies, and broader social analysis. The book became a bestseller, not because it was perfectly written but because it resonated universally, because everyone faces a moment of being underestimated, judged, or dismissed. Suddenly my platform expanded dramatically. Eu wasn't just a finance you but a public figure, an advocate, a voice. The responsibility felt heavy because I was aware that my words carried weight, that my mistakes would be amplified, and that I was held to a higher standard. But it also felt purposeful, as if a decade of suffering wasn't wasted. It was preparation for a larger horde, a larger impact. During the book tour, in city after city, met people whose lives were touched by my story, whose courage was found through my example. I realized that the ultimate revenge against Derek and others wasn't destroying them. It was building a movement that made people like them irrelevant. It was creating a culture where their behavior became unacceptable, insupportable. And it was real power, not power over individuals but the power to reshape systems, expectations and norms. Then Derek, released from prison after serving 2 years, reached out through a lawyer, requesting a meeting, ostensibly to make amends. My initial reaction was absolute refusal, no interest in giving him a platform, in reopening wounds. But Cameron and Dr. Ellis both suggested considering it, not for Derek's benefit but for my own closure, for confronting him directly rather than carrying him as a ghost. After much deliberation, I agreed, in a public space, with witnesses, in clear terms. The meeting was uncomfortable, Derek older, smaller somehow, the humiliation of imprisonment and disgrace visible. Elena, I know I don't deserve your time or an audience, he began, but I need to say that I was wrong, profoundly. My behavior was indefensible, the damage I caused was real, and I spent years in prison thinking, regretting. I listened, my expression neutral, not giving him the satisfaction of visible emotion. I am not seeking forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it, Derek continued. But I am hoping that you know that the acknowledgement is genuine, that if I couldn't do it, I would. I waited silently until he finished. Derek, your acknowledgement means nothing to me, I said finally. My transformation didn't depend on your regret. But I hope it means something to the next person you might harm. I hope the lesson was learned genuinely. I ended the conversation there, not prolonging it, not engaging further. In leaving, I felt not triumph but finality, closing a door on a chapter that had already closed years ago, a confirmation that healing didn't require the perpetrator's remorse, only my own choice to move forward. In that realization that freedom from needing anything from those who harmed me was perhaps the final piece of recovery, the ultimate proof that I not only survived but transcended. 12 years after leaving Titan in humiliation, I was standing on stage at Harvard Business School, invited as a keynote speaker for the graduating MBA class. Looking at the audience of young, eager faces, men reminiscent of myself at 25, I felt a mix of emotions. Pride for how far I had come, and concern because I knew how men would face similar challenges. The speech I prepared was honest, not inspirational platitudes but real talk about barriers, about resilience, about choosing fights carefully. You are graduating a team of unprecedented opportunity, I began, but also unprecedented challenge. In some of you, particularly women, people of color, anyone not fitting the traditional mold, will face resistance, dismissiveness, and active undermining. I paused, scanning the audience, seeing some nodding recognition, some looking uncomfortable. When it happens, you will have a choice. You can internalize the criticism, you can believe the narrative that you don't belong, or you can use it as fuel, as motivation to prove them categorically wrong. I shared an abbreviated version of my story, omitting the most painful details but hitting the key points: dismissal, marginalization, eventual firing, transformation, acquisition, and success. The audience listened intently, silent throughout. But, I continued, it is a truth that nobody tells you. Revenge, even if justified, even if successful, doesn't heal wounds. Proving them wrong doesn't undo the damage. Transforming an industry doesn't erase years of doubt. The honesty seemed to surprise some, expecting a triumphant tally, not a complex acknowledgement. Real power doesn't come from defeating enemies but from building so well that enemies become irrelevant. It doesn't come from being feared but from being genuinely respected. It doesn't come from external vindication but from internal peace with who you are. I concluded with a call to action, not for revenge but for systemic change, for building supportive networks, for advocating for others, for creating a culture where the next generation doesn't face the same barriers. The standing ovation afterward was gratifying, but more valuable were the conversations afterward, students sharing their own experiences, asking for advice, informing connections. One student, a young woman named Priya, approached nervously. Ms. Volkov, your story resonates because I am currently experiencing similar. Internship last year, I was sexually harassed by a supervisor, reported it, and faced retaliation. The firm's EV applied to since seem aware, cold rejections. I am questioning if I should even continue in finance. My heart broke because the cycle was continuing, because the progress wasn't enough, because individual voices were still easily suppressed. Priya, I don't have easy answers, I said honestly. The system is still flawed, but don't let them push you out. Document everything, build a network that supports you, pursue it legally if appropriate, and know that you don't define your worth by how a broken system treats you. I connected Priya with Volkov Foundation resources, with lawyers, mentors, and a support system. Months later, I learned Priya had successfully sued her previous employer, settled, and secured a position at a different firm under a new CEO committed to culture change. A story like dozens of others, each small victory, each person supported, building collective progress. The Foundation's work expanded, not just reactively supporting victims but proactively building pipelines, partnering with universities, creating scholarship programs, sponsoring research organizational behavior, and lobbying for policy changes. The work was exhausting emotionally, constantly confronting the system's resistance, but also rewarding, seeing measurable impact, seeing lives changed. Personally, life balanced finally. Work was meaningful but not all-consuming. My relationship with Cameron was thriving. My hobbies were genuinely enjoyed. And my friendships were genuine. At 40, I felt a sense of contentment that once seemed impossible, peace with the past not because everything was perfect but because I had created a life worth living. I had transformed pain into purpose. I had chosen growth over bitterness. Then something totally unexpected happened that brought everything full circle. Titan Capital, now 13 years under my leadership, was being approached for a merger by another firm. Synergies made sense, the valuation was generous, and each was an opportunity for liquidity in a partial exit. The decision wasn't easy because Titan had become more than a company. It was a symbol of redemption, proof of possibilities. But I also recognized the holding on for symbolic reasons wasn't strategic, that the firm had grown beyond a single person's story, that the legacy wasn't dependent on my constant presence. After extensive deliberation in board discussions, I negotiated a merger that maintained the Titan brand, preserved the culture, protected the employees, and generated substantial returns for all stakeholders. The announcement met mixed reactions in the industry. Some praising the strategic wisdom, some questioning if it was a retreat, was a defeat. But I knew the truth. It wasn't a retreat. It was evolution, recognizing when to hold loosely, not tightly. The merger proceeds were substantial, making me personally wealthy beyond imagining, but the wealth felt less important than it had once. It was a tool, not a goal. I dedicated the majority of it to the Volkov Foundation endowment, ensuring the perpetuity of the work, creating a sustainable support system outlasting my own involvement. Post-merger, I officially retired from an operational role, remaining in an advisory capacity but largely stepping back, allowing the new leadership to flourish. The transition was surprisingly smooth, because I had spent years building systems, a culture, a team that didn't depend on a single person, a truly institutional legacy. With Jimmy freed, my focus shifted entirely to the foundation, to advocacy, to writing, speaking, e-mentoring. I became a grandmother, too. Cameron's sibling had children who regularly visited, bringing a different type of joy, reminding me of the cycles of life beyond professional achievements. My legacy was no longer about business success but about lives touched, systems changed, e-futures enabled. Then I received an unexpected invitation. Derek Ashford's daughter, a young woman named Sophie, reached out, wanting to meet. My initial instinct was absolute refusal, no interest in engaging anything connected to Derek. But Sophie's message was compelling. She explained she was writing a dissertation on corporate accountability, wanted to understand her father's case, and wanted to learn from my perspective. Hesitant, but curiosity winning, I agreed to meet. Meeting Sophie, now 25, the same age I was when everything started, was surreal. She looked like Derek physically, but her mannerisms were different, her demeanor humble, not arrogant. Ms. Volkov, thank you for meeting me, Sophie began. I know it must be asking a lot. Why do you want to talk to me? I asked directly. Because I grew up in the shadow of my father's disgrace, Sophie explained. I knew he was a bad man who went to prison, but I never understood the full story. And now, researching, reading everything, I realized the magnitude of the harm, the systematic nature of his behavior. I wanted to meet the person who faced him, who transformed the situation. We talked for hours, Sophie asking thoughtful questions, me sharing not vindictively but honestly, explaining the impact not just professionally but personally, emotionally, and psychologically. Sophie was visibly emotional, processing the weight of fully understanding her father's actions. Does knowing change anything for you? I asked eventually. Not excuse, but understand context, understand he was a product of a toxic culture, understand the cycle that perpetuated. It commits me to working against it, to ensure the next generation, my generation, creates better. Sophie's honestness reminded me of my own younger self, idealistic, believing change was possible, and I felt happy because if even Derek Ashford's daughter was committed to justice, to equity, then progress was real, was generational. After demiti, Sophie occasionally updated me on her dissertation work, about her advocacy involvement, and about choosing law school focusing on employment discrimination. The connection, while unusual, felt meaningful because each demonstrated healing not just individual but collective, breaking cycles not perpetuating them. Ultimately, 13 years after the humiliation, standing it now, reflecting on my extraordinary journey, I recognized that the judgment of weakness was both profoundly wrong and accidentally correct. It was wrong because my capabilities, intelligence, and strength were always present. But it was correct because the old Elena, the one who sought validation externally, who measured her worth through others' perceptions, who powered through without questioning systems, was weak in certain ways. The new Elena, forged through adversity, wasn't just stronger defensively but stronger authentically, knowing my own worth independent of validation, building not just successfully but meaningfully, transforming not just myself but systems. The lessons learned were invaluable, painful but essential. The true strength is never showing vulnerability but recovering when knocked down, that revenge is best served not through destruction but through construction, that real power comes not from being feared but from creating fear of inadequacy in unjust systems, forcing accountability, in building alternatives. And when people say now I was feared, the meaning shifted from personal fear to institutional fear, the fear that comfortable discriminatory practices would be exposed, challenged, replaced. In that fear, that discomfort, was a catalyst for change, a necessary and disruptor of an unsustainable status quo. And so now, at 45, 15 years since the original exit, looking back not with bitterness but with strange gratitude, because as painful as the journey was, it created a person more complete, more purposeful, and more authentically powerful than the comfortable path ever would have. And for anyone facing similar, for anyone currently judged weak, dismissed, and marginalized, I want to say with absolute certainty that judgment says nothing about you, everything about the judges, and most importantly, it isn't permanent, it isn't a prophecy, it is a challenge to prove yourself capable of extraordinary transformation. Yes, transformation exacts a cost, demands sacrifice, it requires years of work. But the alternative, accepting the judgment, internalizing the limitation, living small, is a price too high. And then suddenly, life continues, work evolves, purpose deepens, and one morning you wake up and realize that the people who once judged no longer matter, that the fear they felt transformed into genuine respect, that the perceived weakness became undeniable strength, and that most importantly, it is not about them anymore. It is about who you chose to become, the impact you chose to create, and the legacy you chose to build. In Helena Volkov, the girl everyone judged weak, now stands as living proof that judgments are temporary, transformations are possible, and real strength is not inherited. It is forged. At 48, 3 years after the merger semi-retirement, I was living a life that my younger self never could have imagined. Mornings started not with a market check but with yoga, breakfast with Cameron, a walk see the park. The Volkov Foundation was thriving under an executive director we hired. My hobby shifted to strategic oversight e occasional public appearances. There was PC stepping back, e trusting others, e recognizing e dignity ter be central always. But then I received a call that shook the peace. It was from an old colleague from Columbia Business School, Professor Dr. Ella White. Helena, I need your expertise in a delicate situation, he explained. We have a student, brilliant, facing circumstances eerily similar to your experience years ago. Traditional channels are failing, and I thought maybe you. The detail he shared made my blood run cold, because the pattern was identical. A young woman, a top student, an internship at a prestigious firm, harassment escalating, reporting met with retaliation, prospects souring. What is her name? I asked. Jessica Lynn. She is struggling, considering dropping the program, leaving finance entirely. Cogigent to let it happen, cogigent to let the cycle repeat without fighting. I met Jessica the following week, at a coffee shop near Columbia. She looked haunted, defeated, exactly how I felt 15 years before. Ms. Volkov, I don't know why you didn't want to meet, Jessica began. I am basically a failure now, blacklisted, my reputation destroyed. Not a failure, a survivor, I corrected firmly. Being blacklisted isn't permanent. It is a challenge. I shared an abbreviated version of my own story, enough to establish credibility and understanding. Jessica listened, tears flowing. But you had resources eventually, you had Prometheus, you had opportunities. I have nothing. My parents can to help financially, my student loans are mountainous, applications are getting rejected everywhere. I recognized the desperation, recognized the need for tangible help, not just sympathy. Jessica, I am going to make an offer. The Volkov Foundation provides a fellowship for exactly this, supporting people in situations like yours. 1 year fully funded, a living stipend, mentorship, connections, in space to rebuild without financial terror. Jessica looked stunned. Why? You don't know me. Because someone should have done this for me, in the dignity. And because I can. Because the resources exist precisely for this, because breaking this cycle requires intervening. Jessica accepted, gratefully, tearfully, joining a cohort of 3 others in similar circumstances. The fellowship program I created wasn't a charity. It was an investment, recognizing talent that the system failed, providing a bridge to rebuild. Watching Jessica throughout the year, seeing her confidence return, seeing her competence reassert itself, seeing her placement at a firm genuinely committed to a culture was profoundly satisfying. It was closing a loop. I also expanded the foundation's work, not just supporting individuals but attacking root causes. Funding research in organizational behavior, developing trainee programs for managers in recognizing and preventing harassment, working with agile professional associations for better standard practices, and lobbying for stronger legal protections. The work was upstream, preventative, addressing the culture before the damage occurred. And the impact was measurable, surveys showing increased reporting comfort, decreased retaliation incidents, and improved outcomes for complainants. The industry was slowly, grudgingly evolving, because the combination of legal liability, reputational risk, and genuine belief shifting created momentum. It wasn't a complete transformation, there were still incidents, still failures, but the direction was clear, the trend positive. I also began teaching occasionally, an adjunct professor at Columbia, teaching a course on leadership ethics and finance, combining case studies, personal experience, guest speakers, and student projects addressing real challenges. The classroom dynamic was fascinating because the students were diverse, some privileged, some marginalized, all grappling with how to navigate ethically a competitive industry. The discussions were rich, the debates passionate, and the learning was mutual. One student, a young man named Carlos, challenged me during a discussion. Ms. Volkov, with all due respect, your story is exceptional. But most people can't fight like you fought, can't spend years planning a comeback. So how does that advice scale? Carlos, you he right that not everyone can replicate my exact path, I acknowledged. But the principle scale. Document everything always, build authentic support networks. Know your own worth independent of validation, choose battles strategically, invest these skills continuously, when the system fails, create alternatives. Most important, support others, because collective action is more powerful than individual. The answer seemed to satisfy him, sparking a discussion about collective organizing, about unions e-finance, about mutual aid, about the structural changes needed. I continued my advocacy work in that direction, testifying before Congress on financial services reform, serving on advisory boards for the SET in CFPB, using my platform to push regulatory changes, enforcement priorities, in industry best practices. The work was often frustrating because change is slow, resistance is strong, and entrenched interests are powerful. But the incremental progress was real. Each small rule change, each enforcement action, each firm-changing policy contributed to the cumulative transformation. Then something totally unexpected happened that brought everything full circle. Titan Capital, now 13 years under my leadership, was being approached for a merger by another firm. Synergies made sense, the valuation was generous, and each was an opportunity for liquidity in a partial exit. The decision wasn't easy because Titan had become more than a company. It was a symbol of redemption, proof of possibilities. But I also recognized the holding on for symbolic reasons wasn't strategic, that the firm had grown beyond a single person's story, that the legacy wasn't dependent on my constant presence. After extensive deliberation in board discussions, I negotiated a merger that maintained the Titan brand, preserved the culture, and protected the employees, and generated substantial returns for all stakeholders. The announcement met with mixed industry reactions, some praising the strategic wisdom, some questioning if it was a retreat, was a defeat. But I knew the truth, it wasn't a retreat. It was evolution, recognizing when to hold loosely, not tightly. I officially retired from an operational hobby post-merger, remaining in an advisory capacity but largely stepping back, allowing the new leadership to flourish. The transition was surprisingly smooth, because I had spent years building systems, a culture, a team that didn't depend on a single person, a truly institutional legacy. With the team freed, my focus shifted entirely to the foundation, to advocacy, to writing, speaking, mentoring. I became a grandmother, too. Cameron's sibling had children who regularly visited, bringing a different type of joy, reminding me of the cycles of life beyond professional achievements. My legacy was no longer about business success but about lives touched, systems changed, futures enabled. Then I received an unexpected invitation. Derek Ashford's daughter, a young woman named Sophie, reached out, wanting to meet. My initial instinct was absolute refusal, no interest in engaging anything connected to Derek. But Sophie's message was compelling. She explained she was writing a dissertation on corporate accountability, wanted to understand her father's case, and wanted to learn from my perspective. Hesitant, but curiosity winning, I agreed. Meeting Sophie, now 25, the same age I was when everything started, was surreal. She looked like Derek physically, but her demeanor was humble, not arrogant. Ms. Volkov, thank you for meeting me, Sophie began. I know it must be asking a lot. Why do you want to talk to me? I asked. Directly. Because I grew up in the shadow of my father's disgrace, Sophie explained. I knew he was a bad man who went to prison, but I never understood the full story. And now, researching, reading everything, I realize the magnitude of the harm, the systematic nature of his behavior. I wanted to meet the person who faced him, who transformed the situation. We talked for hours, Sophie asking thoughtful questions, me sharing not vindictively but honestly, explaining the impact not just professionally but personally, emotionally, and psychologically. Sophie was visibly emotional, processing the weight of fully understanding her father's actions. Does knowing change anything for you? I asked eventually. Not excuse, but understand context, understand he was a product of a toxic culture, understand the cycle that perpetuated. It commits me to working against it, to ensure the next generation, my generation, creates better. Sophie's earnestness reminded me of my own younger self, idealistic, believing change was possible, and I felt happy because if even Derek Ashford's daughter was committed to justice, to equity, then progress was real, was generational. Ultimately, 13 years after the humiliation, standing it now, reflecting on my extraordinary journey, I recognized that the judgment of weakness was both profoundly wrong and accidentally correct. It was wrong because my capabilities, intelligence, and strength were always present. But it was correct because the old Elena, the one who sought validation externally, who measured her worth through others' perceptions, who powered through without questioning systems, was weak in certain ways. The new Elena, forged through adversity, wasn't just stronger defensively but stronger authentically, knowing my own worth independent of validation, building not just successfully but meaningfully, transforming not just myself but systems. The lessons learned were invaluable, painful but essential. The true strength is never showing vulnerability but recovering when knocked down, that revenge is best served not through destruction but through construction, that real power comes not from being feared but from creating fear of inadequacy in unjust systems, forcing accountability, in building alternatives. When people say now I was feared, the meaning shifted from personal fear to institutional fear, the fear that comfortable discriminatory practices would be exposed, challenged, replaced. In that fear, that discomfort was a catalyst for change, a necessary disruptor of an unsustainable status quo. And so now, at 45, 15 years since the original exit, looking back not with bitterness but with strange gratitude, because as painful as the journey was, it created a person more complete, more purposeful, and more authentically powerful than the comfortable path ever would have. And for anyone facing similar, for anyone currently judged weak, dismissed, and marginalized, I want to say with absolute certainty that judgment says nothing about you, everything about the judges, and most importantly, it isn't permanent, it isn't a prophecy, it is a challenge to prove yourself capable of extraordinary transformation. Yes, transformation exacts a cost, demands sacrifice, it requires years of work. But the alternative, accepting the judgment, internalizing the limitation, living small, is a price too high. And then suddenly, life continues, work evolves, purpose deepens, and one morning you wake up and realize that the people who once judged no longer matter, that the fear they felt transformed into genuine respect, that the perceived weakness became undeniable strength, and that most importantly, it is not about them anymore. It is about who you chose to become, the impact you chose to create, and the legacy you chose to build. In Helena Volkov, the girl everyone judged weak, now stands as living proof that judgments are temporary, transformations are possible, and real strength is not inherited. It is forged. At 55 years old, 27 years since the day they called me weak and forced me out of Titan Capital, I am sitting in the office of the Volkov Foundation, which now occupies an entire building in Lower Manhattan, with a staff of 200 employees, operating in 12 countries, having impacted an estimated 15,000 lives directly through fellowships, mentorships, legal aid, and advocacy. The morning started with a video call from Jessica Lane, the young woman I saved 7 years ago, who was now a managing director at a major PE firm, calling to say she was leaving to start her own fund, focused on investing in women-led businesses, using a model inspired by Prometheus. You changed my life, Jessica said emotionally. And now I want to pay it forward, to create opportunities for the next generation. The conversation filled my heart because this was the real legacy, Not monuments or awards but cycles broken, ripples spreading, each person helping others return. Reflecting on the extraordinary journey starting from total humiliation to becoming a figure the industry respected, feared productive ways, finally transcended to something beyond, something quieter but more profound was bittersweet. Because success had costs, relationships were sacrificed, years were consumed, health was impacted, emotional scars that therapy helped but never fully erased remained. But each also brought gifts, resilience earned, wisdom gained, purpose discovered, connections forged. When people asked if I would do it again, knowing the costs, the answer was always complicated because obviously you didn't choose the trauma, or didn't choose the pain, but I also didn't trade the person I became, the impact I made, the legacy I was building. The last few years focused increasingly on succession planning, recognizing that eternal leadership wasn't healthy, that the organization needed to outlast the founder, that ego had to step aside for sustainability. We hired an executive director for the foundation, a brilliant woman named Doutora Mara Johnson, who had experience in social justice, organizational development, and fundraising, the perfect combination. The transition was gradual, intentional, me moving to an emeritus hard, advisory not operational, allowing Amara full authority, full credit, and full ownership. Titan also transitioned again, a new CEO from within, a product of the culture I built, someone who embodied the values, continued the vision. My involvement was minimal, a board member but largely silent, attending strategic retreats but not daily operations. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm, mornings with Cameron, afternoons off in volunteering, evenings reading, occasionally writing, hosting dinners for friends, and traveling for pleasure, not business. The relationships once neglected were prioritized, friendships deepened, family connections were maintained, life was balanced. My health, compromised by years of stress, required ongoing management but was actually improving with reduced pressure, regular exercise, and mindfulness practices. I found joy in small things, gardening surprisingly, tending plants in a rooftop garden, watching the growth, nurturing life metaphorically satisfying. I also began a therapy group for other survivors of workplace trauma, facilitating alongside Dr. Ellis, creating a space for shared experience, mutual support, in collective healing. Then something unexpected happened that reframed the entire narrative one final time. I received an award, a Lifetime Achievement Recognition from the Women in Finance Association, a big ceremony, honoring speeches, a video tribute. Preparing my remarks, reflecting on what to say, I realized traditional success metrics money made, firms transformed, awards received witty to what mattered ultimately. What mattered were the connections made, the lives touched, the systems challenged, the culture shifted. Standing on stage, looking at the audience of hundreds of women in finance, seeing diverse faces, seeing hopeful energy, I felt an overwhelming sense of having contributed to something larger, something ongoing. When I started my career 27 years ago, I believed that merit was sufficient, that competence was enough, that hard work would be rewarded. I was wrong. The system was rigged, the culture was toxic, and barriers were real. When I faced that, when I was labeled inadequate, weak, I had a choice. I could internalize it, give up, or I could fight. I fought, as you all know. I won in many ways. My career rebuilt, my company transformed, the industry impacted. But personal victories, satisfying as they were, are not enough. Because the system that failed me still exists, is still failing others, is still requiring constant challenge, constant vigilance, and constant work. And the true legacy is not Titan Capital as success, it is not the Volkov Foundation as reach. It is every person in this room and countless others who chose to fight, who refused to accept the judgment, who transformed marginalization into motivation, who built not despite the barriers but by transforming the barriers. Into the next generation, to the young women starting careers now, I want to say, it will not be easy. Resistance is to exist, biases is to operate, challenges is to await. But you have advantages we didn't. The culture is slightly shifted, protections are slightly strengthened, support systems are slightly better. And most importantly, you have examples, you have a network, and you have collective power. Use it. Support each other, challenge injustice, demand accountability, build alternatives. And when you are knocked down, because you will be, get up, document, organize, and fight smart, not just hard. And know that the weakness they claim to see is actually strength, because surviving requires strength, thriving despite requires extraordinary strength, transforming systems requires legendary strength. In their judgments, their assumptions, their limitations, are not yours. They are reflections of their own inadequacy, their own fear, their own recognition that a merit-based system threatens their privilege. In the fear that I created, the fear that Helena Volkov inspired, was not personal fear but institutional fear, the fear that the next generation want to accept the unacceptable, want to tolerate the intolerable, want to perpetuate broken systems. In that fear, that discomfort is the engine of change, is the catalyst for progress, is the proof that when unified, when determined, and when strategic, we are not weak. We are an unstoppable force. The standing ovation lasted minutes, emotional, powerful, reaffirming. Afterward, dozens approached, sharing stories, seeking advice, forming connections. Each interaction reminded me that they were quase done, wasn't individual, wasn't about a single person but a collective, ongoing, generational movement. And now, driving home with Cameron, processing the day, feeling a profound sense of contentment, I reflected. Helena Volkov, judged weak, became Helena Volkov, reason for fear not through cruelty but through competence, through refusing to accept limitations, through building so successfully that denial became impossible. The fear gradually transformed into respect, respect into influence, influence into legacy. And the legacy is not measured in accumulated wealth, although substantial, nor in awards received, although numerous, but in lives changed, each Jessica Lynn thriving, each system challenged, each barrier lowered, each person empowered to refuse to accept judgment as destiny. And for anyone currently in that dark place, for anyone labeled weak, dismissed, or marginalized, I want to say with absolute certainty, and through 27 years lived, judgment is temporary, transformation is possible, real strength is not the absence of being knocked down, which is the commitment to always rise, to always fight, and to always build better. And the journey is not ended, because change requires eternal vigilance, because each generation faces battles, because progress is never permanent. But the direction is clear, the momentum is strong, and the collective power is growing. In Helena Volkov's story, individual as it was, is one thread in a larger tapestry, is one voice in a growing chorus, is one example proving that weak does not exist. There is only temporarily defeated, defeated only if you accept the label, if you internalize the judgment, if you give up. In the choice to refuse is always available. It is the ultimate power. It is the accessible transformation. And now we come to the end of this 27-year journey, from judgment to transcendence. Tell me in the comments, rate this story from 0 to 10. Share if it resonated, if it inspired, if it challenged. And if you are currently facing something similar, no resources exist, support is available, you are not alone, and the weakness they claim is strength emerging. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, for being part of a movement that transforms marginalization into empowerment, that transforms judgment into justice, and that transforms perceived weakness into undeniable strength. And may you find your own journey to reclaim power, voice, e future. Thank you.